Hello, Muslim friends in the world. In a small town surrounded by green hills, there lived a boy named Ahmad. He was only 12 years old, but his intelligence surpassed that of children his age. Ahmad was the son of a fruit merchant in the market, and his days were spent helping his father carry fruit crates and serve customers. However, behind his simple life, Ahmad had an extraordinary passion for learning. Every morning before the sun rose, Ahmad would run to the small mosque at the edge of the village to learn the Quran from Imam Zaid. Ahmad didn't just memorize verses, but he also always asked about their meanings. His questions often made Imam Zaid smile in amazement. "Ahmad," said Imam Zaid one morning, "you are a special child. Your understanding of religion is deeper than you realize. Keep learning, for knowledge will be the light that guides your path." Ahmad only smiled shyly. He didn't feel special. To him, learning was a form of worship, a way to draw closer to Allah. However, in that small town, not everyone agreed with Ahmad's beliefs. At the other end of the town stood a large church, led by Pastor William, a famous preacher from a big city. Pastor William was known for his fiery sermons that stirred the congregation, but often included sharp jabs at other religions. The news of Pastor William's arrival in the small town spread like wildfire. People flocked to the church to hear his sermon. However, there were whispers among the Muslims that his visit was not just to preach, but also to humiliate Islam and its followers. "He will hold a big lecture this week," said a merchant in the market to Ahmad's father. "They say he likes to challenge Muslims to prove the truth of their faith. We must be cautious." Ahmad's father nodded. "Let him speak as he wishes. The truth doesn't need to be debated. Ahmad, help your father arrange these apples." Ahmad listened intently to the conversation. In his heart, there was a sense of curiosity mixed with a desire to know what would happen. He did not expect that soon, his life would be connected to the famous preacher in an unexpected way. On the night before Pastor William's lecture, Ahmad sat in the mosque yard after the Isha prayer. He gazed at the starry sky and reflected. "O Allah," he whispered, "if I am given the chance, allow me to defend your truth, even though I am just a little child." Ahmad's prayer soared into the sky, marking the beginning of a new chapter in his life. A great destiny awaited him, and that small town would bear witness to the courage of a simple boy who would astonish everyone. The awaited day arrived. The large church in the city center was filled with congregation members. Many of them came not only to hear Pastor William's sermon, but also because they were curious about the news that the pastor would prove that Islam was the wrong religion. Outside the church, the atmosphere was lively. The congregation chatted enthusiastically, while in another corner, a group of Muslims gathered, feeling pressured yet curious about what would happen. Among them stood Ahmad, silent, observing the scene with his sharp eyes and a mind full of questions. Inside the church, Pastor William stood on the pulpit, wearing a long robe that gave him an air of authority. His voice was loud and confident. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "today we are not just talking about faith, but about truth. And truth must be tested." The congregation cheered, fully supportive. Pastor William continued, "If any of you is a Muslim who believes that their religion is the true path, I challenge them to come forward. Let's see who has the answers to my questions." The challenge made the entire room fall silent. The congregation began to glance at one another, waiting to see if anyone was brave enough to accept the challenge. However, no Muslim moved. Some of them, who had only come to listen, lowered their heads, feeling powerless in the face of the famous preacher's sharp rhetoric. Outside the church, Ahmad heard the loud voice, and his curiosity grew stronger. He walked into the church even though a few Muslims tried to stop him. "Ahmad, this is not your business," whispered one of them. But Ahmad didn't listen. He felt that this was his opportunity to do something great. With steady steps, the boy walked to the front, standing in the middle of the large room filled with the congregation. All eyes were on him. Pastor William stared at Ahmad with a look of surprise, then smiled dismissively. "A little child? Is this the best defender that the Muslims of this town have?" Ahmad was undaunted. With a calm yet clear voice, he replied, "Pastor, I may be just a child, but I believe that truth is not determined by age. You want to ask, and I will try to answer with what I know." The room grew even quieter. The congregation began to be impressed by the boy's courage, though many still thought he would not be able to face such a great preacher as Pastor William. "Very well," said Pastor William with a sarcastic smile. "Let's begin. If your God is one, as you claim, why does he need angels and prophets to convey his will? Does this not show weakness?" Ahmad closed his eyes for a moment, praying silently for strength and wisdom. Then, with full confidence, he answered, "Pastor, allow me to ask you a question in return. Do you have a right hand and a left hand?" The question confused the pastor slightly, but he answered, "Of course." Ahmad continued, "Why do you use your right hand to write and your left hand to hold a book? Are you not strong enough to do everything with just one hand?" The room fell silent. The congregation exchanged glances, trying to understand the boy's answer. Pastor William's face tensed, but before he could say anything, Ahmad continued, "Allah is almighty. However, he created angels and prophets, not because of his weakness, but to show us the best way to live. Just as you use both hands for different purposes, Allah uses his creatures to deliver his message in the best way for humanity." Some of the congregation began whispering. They hadn't expected the boy to give such a simple yet reasonable answer. Pastor William tried to hide his surprise. "Very well," he said. "Then let me ask something harder. If your God exists, why can't we see him?" Ahmad smiled. He knew this question was often asked by many who doubted the existence of Allah. Calmly he answered, "Pastor, can you see your own thoughts? Can you see love or compassion? Just because something cannot be seen doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We see Allah through the signs of his creation, just as we feel the wind even though we cannot see it." The answer left some in the congregation stunned. Some of them nodded slowly, as though they were realizing something they had never thought about before. Pastor William began to lose his patience. With a louder tone, he said, "Then answer this. If Islam is the true religion, why are so many Muslims poor and oppressed in this world?" Ahmad remained calm, even though he knew this question was meant to attack his emotions. He lifted his head and said, "Pastor, a test is not given to a student who has already failed, but to a student who wants to pass. Allah tests his people not because he does not care, but because he wants to raise their status. Hardship is a sign of his love, not the weakness of his people." Ahmad's words echoed in the church. The congregation began to see this little boy not as an ordinary child, but as someone who carried the truth. Pastor William no longer smiled. On his face, there was doubt that had never been seen before. Unbeknownst to Ahmad, something extraordinary was happening. Not only the congregation, but even Pastor William himself began to question his beliefs. The church, which had initially been filled with pride, was now enveloped in a silence full of reflection. A new chapter had begun, and Ahmad had shown that courage and faith could stir the hearts of anyone, even those who initially opposed him. The church room became silent. The congregation, which had once cheered for Pastor William, was now still. They looked at Ahmad with eyes full of curiosity, as if the little boy held the key to unlocking doors of understanding that had been tightly shut for so long. Meanwhile, Pastor William, who was usually full of confidence, appeared uneasy. He paced back and forth on the pulpit, trying to find a way to continue the debate without losing his authority. Yet every word that came from Ahmad's mouth seemed to shatter the wall of rhetoric he had built over the years. With a softer tone, but still trying to maintain his authority, Pastor William said, "Very well, young man. Your answer is quite clever. But allow me to ask one last question. If your God is indeed all just, why does he allow suffering? Why are there wars, hunger, and death, even among the Muslims who worship him?" Ahmad paused for a moment. He closed his eyes, recalling the lessons Imam Zayd had taught him. With full confidence, he opened his eyes and said, "Pastor, allow me to ask you a question in return. If you see a teacher giving a difficult test to his students, does that mean the teacher does not care about them?" Pastor William furrowed his brow. "Of course not. The teacher gives the test to measure the student's abilities." Ahmad nodded. "So it is with Allah. Suffering is not a sign that Allah is unjust, but a form of test to measure the faith and patience of his servants. Allah gives us intellect, strength, and hearts to overcome difficulties. Through these trials, he raises our status, just as a teacher prepares his students to advance to a higher level." That answer left many in the congregation stunned. Some even appeared to shed tears. An elderly woman in the back row whispered, "This child is wiser than his age. His words are so touching." Pastor William seemed to be running out of words. He tried to think of a counter-argument, but every thought that came to mind felt weak compared to the clarity and sincerity of Ahmad's answers. Suddenly, a man from the front row, a devout church member known for his strong faith, stood up and said, "Pastor William, with all due respect, I want to ask this child, young man, where do you get all this knowledge? How is it possible for a child your age to have such deep understanding?" Ahmad smiled humbly and answered, "All of this comes from the Quran, the word of Allah revealed through the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I simply read, learn, and try to understand it. The Quran is the light that guides me, and I believe that light can also guide anyone who seeks it with a sincere heart." Ahmad's answer caused a drastic shift in the atmosphere inside the church. The congregation, who had initially come to support Pastor William, began asking Ahmad questions. They asked about Islam, about the Quran, and about the beliefs they had always considered to be wrong. Ahmad answered each question with patience and sincerity. There was no arrogance or condescension, only the intention to share the truth. His words, simple yet full of meaning, touched the hearts of many in the room. Amidst the increasingly intense atmosphere, Pastor William suddenly spoke in a quiet voice, almost like a whisper. "Young man, I have been preaching for over 20 years. I have spent my life believing that my religion is the true path. But today, you have made me question everything." The church room became even quieter than before. All eyes were on Pastor William, who now appeared very different from the authoritative figure who had stood on the pulpit moments earlier. He looked like a man struggling with his own heart. "If what you say is true," Pastor William continued, "then perhaps I have neglected something very important in my life." Ahmad looked at Pastor William with eyes full of compassion. He said, "The truth is always there, Pastor. Sometimes we just need to open our hearts to see it. If you truly seek it, I believe Allah will guide you to the right path." Ahmad's words seemed to open a door that had long been locked in Pastor William's heart. The pastor fell silent, lost in his own thoughts. The congregation began whispering among themselves, but no one dared to disturb the silence. At that moment, something extraordinary was happening. The room, once filled with pride and arrogance, was now filled with humility and deep reflection. Ahmad, the little boy from the market, had planted seeds of truth in the hearts of everyone present. A great change was approaching, and Ahmad knew that his task had only just begun. The next day, news of Ahmad's bravery spread throughout the city. People who had not been at the church heard the story of how a Muslim boy had faced Pastor William with courage and wisdom. Not only that, this news also reached many communities in other cities, making Ahmad's name the talk of the town. However, the most surprising development was Pastor William's decision. A few days after the meeting in the church, the pastor invited Ahmad and Imam Zaid for a private conversation. The meeting took place in the now quieter church, without the congregation's crowd. As they sat together, Pastor William began the conversation in a tone much gentler than usual. "Ahmad," he said, "your words from a few days ago have been echoing in my mind. For so long I felt certain of my path, but you have opened the door to doubts that I can no longer ignore." Ahmad smiled politely. "Doubt is the beginning of a search, Pastor. If you search with a sincere heart, Allah will show the way." Pastor William paused for a moment, then continued, "For years I have spoken about God, but I have never truly known Him. You have made me want to learn more about Islam. Would you guide me, Ahmad?" Hearing this, Ahmad's eyes welled up with tears. In a trembling voice, he replied, "I am just a little boy, Pastor, but I will do my best to help you." Imam Zaid, sitting beside Ahmad, said, "Allah has given guidance to those who sincerely seek it. We will help you understand Islam, William. It is not an easy journey, but the door is always open for those who wish to draw near to Allah." The following days became a meaningful journey for Pastor William. He studied the Quran, engaged in long discussions with Imam Zaid, and reflected on many things he had previously ignored. The deeper he studied Islam, the more he felt a peace he had never experienced before. Not only that, the congregation, who had previously supported Pastor William, began to show great interest in Islam. They approached Ahmad and Imam Zaid, asking about a religion they had only heard about from a negative perspective. Ahmad patiently answered their questions, sometimes using simple analogies that made complex concepts easy to understand. Then one day, inside the church, filled with the congregation, Pastor William stood before them, but this time not to preach. With an emotional voice, he said, "My brothers and sisters, for many years I have led you down a path I thought was right. However, a little boy has opened my eyes to a greater truth. After studying Islam, I have found a peace I never knew before." The entire congregation was shocked. Some even cried, but no one shouted or protested. Pastor William continued, "I have decided to embrace Islam, not because I want to leave you, but because I want you to see the truth I have found. If you want to know more, let us learn together." That event became a major turning point for the church. Many members of the congregation began to learn about Islam, and most of them eventually followed Pastor William's example and embraced the religion. Ahmad, who witnessed all of this from the corner of the room, felt humbled. He had never imagined that his courage in answering the challenge that day would bring such a profound change. Imam Zaid patted his shoulder and said, "Ahmad, you have become an instrument of Allah to spread the truth. Remember, this is not about you, but about Allah's guidance working through your heart." Ahmad nodded, his eyes wet with tears of joy. He realized that his bravery and intelligence were only a small part of Allah's grand plan. The church eventually transformed into a center for studying Islam, where people from various backgrounds came to learn about the religion that had touched their hearts. The small town became a witness to how the light of truth could spread through a little boy, with faith as great as a mountain. And Ahmad, the simple market boy, became an inspiration to many, proving that truth knows no age, status, or physical strength. Only a sincere heart and steadfast faith can bring about great change in a person's life. This story serves as a timeless reminder that Allah chooses whomever He wills to bring the light of truth. Ahmad is proof that even a small child can be a source of great change, as long as he believes in Him.